Our reading is from Genesis chapter 21, verses 1 to 21. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. But Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave him the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse his children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation because he is your offspring. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of the Lord called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. When God opened her eyes, she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt.
Can I ask you a question? Who is your favorite comedian? Now, if you're like me, you have comedians who you appreciate and one or two that you really like, but you don't want to admit to. Who is your favorite comedian? I don't know who it is. Is it Tommy Cooper? Is it John Cleese? I will go through the years. Is it someone like Michael McIntyre? Is it someone like Catherine Tate? Is it someone like that? I mean, who's your favorite comedian? Tommy Cooper, I think, is right up there. I'm showing my age. Perhaps it's my dad's sense of humor as well. But he has a way of doing things that just gets me, no matter how many times I've seen it. Peter Kay is just a wonderful observer of human nature and life, a bit like Michael McIntyre. And he just cracks me up. I've watched the same clips time and time again, and I find myself crying again and again. Now, the reason some of us may not want to admit who we laugh at or laugh with is because Christians have a strange relationship with comedy. There's people on the screen that you can see that describe Christians' relationship with comedy. Christians and laughter often have the same relationship as oil and water. They just don't mix. But Uncle Albert was right in Mary Poppins as he took off from the floor. People love to laugh. Some people laugh through their teeth. Some people laugh through their noses. Some people laugh in different ways. But Christians have a problem with laughter. I'm convinced of that, having thought about it this week. We take ourselves far too seriously. Sometimes we just need to remember God's grace and be able to laugh at ourselves rather than taking everything so seriously, including ourselves. Now, why do I start like that? There is a theme that I just want to pull upon, a piece of spaghetti, as it were, that's run through the book of Genesis so far. Genesis 11 to 21, we've seen laughter in different shapes and sizes. And I want to draw on that piece of spaghetti. I want to pull that string and lots of different metaphors this morning. Look at Genesis 21 with me, please. We need to go backwards and forwards in the story of Abraham and Sarah. But I want us to look at Genesis 21, verse 6. First of all, here is Sarah, and she's laughing. Sarah is old. She's a senior woman. But look at 21 verse 6. God has brought me laughter. And everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. There are different types of laughter. Same word, but different meanings in different contexts. In Genesis 11 through Genesis 21, and I want to look at 3. All of us have to go through the first 2 kinds of laughter in our relationship with God before we get to the third. 3 types of laughter. You've got a spoiler alert on the screen. Number 1, the laughter of scoffing. The laughter of scoffing. Scoffing is disbelief. Scoffing is disbelief. Look back to Genesis 12 with me. Remember how the story begins. In Genesis 11:27, God calls Abraham, the idol worshipper from Ur of the Chaldeans. Genesis 12, these very famous sentences that you can see on the screen that says, I'm going to do something remarkable in you and through you to bless the whole world. I'm going to draw you to myself. I'm going to call you to myself. And if you think you're old now, just wait till I've finished building faith in you. I'm going to build faith in you and build a relationship between you and me and between your wife and I, says God, by putting this promise on hold. I'm going to give you a son when you're really old. You're old now, but when you're really old, I'm going to give you a son of promise. And through that son, a great nation will grow. And the nation's going to be so great, it's going to include kings. Kings are going to come from your wife. And you're going to bless the whole world through your family, Abraham. You're going to be not just a daddy. Your name's going to mean Big Daddy. And the whole world is going to be blessed through you. Abraham hears these famous words in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. I'm going to give your wife a child. I know she's old, and I know she's barren. Remember that? Genesis chapter 11, I think this is verse 30. But just think what God has been doing. Why has he made this promise, Genesis 12, and why did he not answer it straight away? That would make sense. Why is there not just a pause in God's answering of his promise? Why are there decades when faith could erode or faith could build? Well, think, if God had provided Abraham and Sarah a son of promise just days after the word of promise that was given to Abraham, Abraham would have rejoiced. He would have been excited because Sarah is barren. But the world wouldn't have been surprised. They would be shocked. She's old. She's getting on a bit. But because she's so old, because it's been 25 years of waiting, when Genesis chapter 21 happens, when Isaac is born, Abraham is amazed. But at the same time, the world is really amazed. But nothing is impossible with God. Look also, though, in Genesis chapter 12, the promise is repeated in Genesis 15. The promise looks like it's not coming true. And it would be easy for Abraham and Sarah to walk away from God and to stop trusting him. But the promise comes again and again. Finally, in Genesis chapter 17, it's given in 12, it's repeated in 15, it's repeated in chapter 17. But finally, in Genesis chapter 17, when Abraham is nearly 100 years old and Sarah is nearly 90, God finally shows up. And he says in Genesis chapter 17, verse 15, repeating the promise again, Abraham, I will come. I will come back in a year's time, and I will give you a son. And how do you think Abraham, the man of faith, responds? Genesis chapter 17, verse 17. When Abraham heard the promise, he fell face down, it says, if you look at the verse. Genesis 17, 17. Abraham heard the voice of God, the promise of God re-uttered, the promise that he heard in Genesis 12, the promise he heard in Genesis 15, the promise that's restated in Genesis 17. And Abraham, the man of faith, falls down before the Lord. Whenever we hear that phrase in the Bible, it's always you prostrate yourself, you bow before the Lord in reverent fear, in adoration, in worship. And here's Abraham, the man of faith, the man of God. In Genesis 17:17, he fell face down, but what did he do? He laughed. He's bent over double. Whether James Corden is a comedian or not, we can talk about that. Whether he's a chat show host or not, we can talk about that as well. But the picture's on the screen because that's what Abraham did. He heard the voice of God that he heard before at least twice with the same promise. And what is his response? It's not worship. It's not adoration. He is belly laughing because surely God cannot do what he's promised. It's too good to be true. It's too impossible to be possible. And so he fell face down and laughed. He doubled up. Not only that, next chapter, Genesis 18. Remember there's these three strange visitors, this passage we looked at a few weeks ago? These visitors literally knock on the tent flap of Abraham and Sarah. God is one of the visitors. The two others are two angels who bring the judgment, the justice of God on Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19 and 20. But in Genesis 18, one of the visitors is the angel of the Lord. That's the pre-incarnate Jesus who's come to speak to Abraham. Abraham, Genesis 18, verse 10. Abraham, next year I will return and Sarah will have a son. Sarah's listening in. She's at the tent flap. She's curious who's speaking and what they're going to say. Genesis 18, verse 12. How does Sarah respond to what the Lord says? So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out and my master is old and I now have this pleasure, Abraham bent over double, Genesis 17:17. Sarah is also laughing internally. There's no way that this can come true. Now what had happened? It's the laughter of scoffing. It's the laughter of disbelief. It's the laughter of impossibility. Abraham and Sarah, I think, had lost their belief in the supernatural power of God. I know you promised, but the clock is ticking in more ways than one. This is now impossible. There's no way you can do what you said. I mean, think if God were to open Sarah's womb in her 60s, that would be remarkable. In her 70s, that would be incredible. In her 90s, no way. There's no way. It would have been a miracle in her earlier senior years. But now the ship has sailed. God cannot do what he said. It's laughable what he's suggesting. It's impossible what he's promising. And so Abraham and Sarah are pulling back from their faith in God and in his promises. Genesis 18, Sarah laughed as she hears God remind Abraham, I will come back to you in 1 year and your wife will have a son. It's a little late, isn't it, God? I mean, the clock is broken. It's not even ticking anymore. What is Sarah doing? I think Sarah is trying to defend herself against hope. I think she's trying to protect herself. There's something she wants so dearly, so earnestly, so much. Society said, Sarah, you must be this person. And then God, is God cruel? God's made this promise, Genesis 12, 15, 17, 18, and now it's not coming true. I think she's trying to defend herself against hope. And so she scoffs. She even does it internally. And yet God, the Lord, hears what's happening in her heart. It's the laughter of scoffing. It's the laughter of skepticism. There are many, many people today who laugh at Christianity. People in the church who reject the supernaturalness of Christianity. We accept many of the humanly acceptable, historically reasonable parts of Christianity, but there's some parts that are just too much to be true. We reject the idea that God created the world. We reject the idea that God could have been born in a virgin's womb supernaturally. We certainly reject the idea of a physical resurrection. It's impossible. 1 out of 1 people die, no one comes back from the grave. I want you to recognize 2 things we need to learn and be challenged by from Abraham and Sarah's laughter. First of all, the reason people disbelieve the gospel is not because it promises too little, but because it promises too much. What does the gospel promise? This is the good news of Christianity. The gospel promises that beyond the world that we can see, taste, touch, the sounds that we can hear, the things that we can enjoy, but beyond this world there is the unseen. There is reality. There is the better, more glorious world. There's a bright heavenly future. There's everything in that place and in the gospel that your heart desires and longs for. We want to live and we don't want to die. We want to create things. We're made for that and we don't want to be frustrated. We want to love people and be loved by people and we don't want to break up and we don't want our hearts broken. But the Bible says from beginning to end there is a barrier between this world and what is real and true and glorious. And in spite of all our flaws, in spite of our determination to live in our own way and say no to God, God has broken in to our world. He's broken through the barrier of our disobedience and our lovelessness towards him. He's broken through the apparently real, through the true and the unseen. He's made a hole, and all that power of heaven, all that goodness is now possible and real to us through Jesus Christ. It's not possible by us having some sort of qualifications. It's not possible for us by us dreaming up some world. No, the real has become manifest in history. That's one of the reasons people disbelieve the gospel. It doesn't promise too little. It promises too much. It's too good to be true, and yet it's true. Here's the second reason. There's always very deep emotional reasons that people reject Christianity. Lots of deep emotional reasons. Here's Abraham and Sarah. They're rejecting this incredible promise, but they're showing what modern parlance would be an intellectual skepticism. I don't believe God can do what he has promised to do. I think they're afraid to hope, especially Sarah, because she's afraid that she'll lose control. Think about it this way. If you're reading The Fall and Rise of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbons, you can read that and think, this is great. These pictures are so gory. They're amazing. That's if you're a teenage boy. It doesn't matter if you think that book is true or not. It doesn't matter if you think the Romans created the greatest society ever or not. But if you read the Gospels, it's a whole different story. If the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if you sit down and read those as historic fact, that makes all the difference in the world. Your whole life will be turned upside down if Jesus lived, if he existed, if his claims were real and true, if he died, if he was raised to life again on the third day. Your whole life is changed if it's true. Friends, we have very powerful emotions to not want to hope in the gospel because we do not want to be disappointed. We don't want to be let down. Here's Abraham and Sarah before Isaac was born. They were laughing. Why were they laughing? Why were they scoffing? Why were they disbelieving? Well, it's kind of a shadow laughter. It's the laughter of scoffing, I think, because they wanted to defend themselves and they wanted to defend their hearts at the cost of God's promises. Friends, recognize the danger of scoffing. Recognize the danger of the scoffer. Scoffing stops you from hoping in something great because you're afraid that it's true. And so you protect yourself with laughter. But the second type of laughter, well, that's found in our passage this morning, which is chapter 21. Here's the second type of laughter, the laughter of your heart's first love. I've played around with this title, whether it should be called the laughter of idolatry, but it's the same thing, the laughter of your heart's first love. What do I mean? Isaac has now been born miraculously, but read on Genesis chapter 21, verse 8. What happens after the birth of Isaac? After the birth of Isaac, after he's weaned, Abraham throws a massive party. Massive party in his tent, you can imagine. All the fairy lights are out. The table is just weighed down with all the goodness that he can get his hands on. He's celebrating the son of promise after 2 to 3 decades of waiting has now come. I'm going to throw the party the like of which the desert's never seen before. You can just imagine Abraham and Sarah laughing and enjoying and doting on their son, the son whom they loved, the son who they thought they would never get, the miraculous son. But then look at the next sentence. Genesis 21, verse 9. What happens next? We're told that Ishmael, who was Abraham's other son, remember, with Hagar, was mocking, he was making fun of Isaac. And so Sarah says this, get rid of that slave woman and her son. It's the narrator who tells us her name. Sarah doesn't want to even mention her name. And she takes the opportunity, by the way, just to rub our noses in it, that remember that Hagar is a slave woman. It's this kind of reminder of status check. What's going on here? You can just imagine the party. You can imagine the wine is flowing, the food is being enjoyed. It might be a day, it might be longer, we're not sure. But something happens in Sarah's heart so that she changes her laughter. Here is my son of laughter. And yet the laughter in her heart turns to rage because she realizes that the apple of her eye is being mocked. The center of her world, shade is being thrown on her son, so to speak. There's something wrong with her heart. Her joy has been erased and it's replaced with anger because Isaac is being mocked by Ishmael. There's something also, lest we just pick on Sarah. If you go ahead, spoiler alert to next week, Genesis 22, lest we're being sexist or unkind or unbalanced, it's not just Sarah who has a problem. Look at what happens in Genesis 22, verse 1. It's not just Sarah who's laughing. Look at Abraham's laughter. God comes to Abraham, Genesis 22, verse 1, and it says, God tested Abraham. God tested Abraham. We'll think about this next week. But this is what happens. Abraham, take your son, your only son, the son whom you love, and go to the mountains of Moriah, and I want you to sacrifice your son there. Come again. Say what? Are you serious? Why would God, knowing how crushingly difficult this quest would be, why would he make this call to Abraham to say, take your son, your only son, the son whom you love? Why does the focus of God's request zoom in on Isaac rather than on Ishmael, who's always struggled, who's always been on the fringes of the family? Because God in his grace is identifying the key issue in both of their hearts. He's exposing their first love, and it's not him. It's the son of promise. Can you see what Abraham and Sarah have done? They've taken all their heart's affections, and rather than them being directed heavenward towards God, so to speak, positionally, it's focused on this son of promise. Rather than being focused on the giver, it's focused on the gift, who is Isaac. And God is identifying in his grace the core issue at work in their hearts. He's exposing their first love, and it's not him. Here's what Abraham and Isaac have done. They've taken Isaac and they've made him the center of their lives. It's the laughter, not just of idolatry, it's the laughter of fixation. And you can see that because of the passion of which Sarah is willing to defend Isaac. He was the son that their universe revolved around. He was the light of their lives. He was the apple of their eye. All bets are off. It's all on Isaac. Now here's something we need to consider, and let's talk to you parents here. If behind scoffing is self-defense and fear, this is a different type of laughter. It turns to rage very, very quickly if anything goes wrong with the thing that you've put your hopes in. So let's talk about parents and parenting. Do you know what happens, friends, if you build your life on your children? Two dangers, equal and opposite. If your child is the very first thing in your life, you may be deeply passionate to avoid the displeasure of your child. And so you under-discipline. You under-care. You'll do anything to avoid your child getting angry, to displeasing them. And if you under-discipline your child, the danger is your child grows up spoilt, under-disciplined, and self-indulgent. There's the equal and opposite danger, of course, as well. I don't want that ever to happen. I can see that in other people's parenting, in other people's families. I'm not going to under-discipline. I'm going to turn it right up. I'm going to over-discipline. I'm going to be harsh. I'm going to be unkind because I'm going to live out my future through my child, through my children. When that happens, they must be the best at what they do. They must be the most beautiful child. They must be the most athletic, the most successful, whatever. The equal and opposite danger. One is under discipline, one is over discipline, living out your past or your future or your hopes or your frustrated dreams through your child, through your children. What on earth could go wrong with that? Everything. It's so destructive, friends, to under or over discipline your child. But this is the laughter. The second type of laughter, not of scorn, but of fixation. And Sarah is saying, in the midst of Abraham throwing this great party, I will do anything to defend the apple of my eye, who is Isaac. Get rid of that woman, and with her, get rid of her son. Both types of laughter are ways of staying in charge. And here we've got Isaac as the gift, but Isaac was not the giver. And God, in his mercy and in his grace, exposes what's really going on in the heart of Abraham and Isaac. But here's the third type of laughter that you see in this story, Genesis 11 to 21. And it's the laughter not of scoffing, not of fixation or of idolatry or of the first love of your heart. It's the laughter of grace. Thirdly, it's the laughter of grace. Back to our passage, verses 6 and 7. What is the laughter of grace? God has brought me laughter. Who would have said to Abraham and Sarah, would nurse children, yet I have? That's the key phrase in the whole passage. It's all there. But we need to go back once again to Genesis 18. There's that lovely moment where Sarah's listening in. The angel of the Lord comes and speaks to Abraham. And Sarah's saying, I do not understand how this is going to happen. I'm going to come back, says the Lord, and Sarah will get a child. Genesis 18, verse 10. She hears through the tent and she laughs to herself. Excuse me, verse 12. Sarah is saying, Genesis 18, verse 12, come on, Lord. There's no way this is going to happen. And the Lord turns to her. She didn't say it out loud. It was just in her spirit. It was in her heart. Why did you laugh? Why did you laugh? I didn't laugh. No, but you did. There's a strange interaction between the Lord and Sarah in Genesis chapter 18, verses 10 to 15. Why is that conversation necessary with the Lord pursuing and wanting Sarah to own what she said? I think because the Lord wants it on record where Sarah is, not in location, but in her attitude towards him. There's a key sentence right in the middle of that strange dialogue between the Lord and Sarah, where it says, why did Sarah laugh when I said this? Is anything too hard for the Lord? Genesis 18, verse 14. Literally, it says, it should say, I think it's more helpful if we read it, verse 18, is anything too wonderful for the Lord? That's what the word says. No one translates it in that way for a reason I do not understand. Sarah's mistake is this. Sarah's struggle is this, and it's a very understandable struggle. Is anything too wonderful for the Lord to do? Is anything impossible for the Lord to do? She doubted God's power. That's the key issue. She doubted God's ability to do what he said he would do. It's a struggle we all face, but not if you're a little child. Little children wonder really easily, don't they? They get eyes as big as saucers when you show them a certain animal. When they see a stag beetle like we've seen in our garden this week, their eyes go like saucers or bigger, but because of fear, not of enjoyment or joy. You go to the zoo and you see a giraffe. Who doesn't just get amazed at the size of a giraffe? Who doesn't get enamored with the power of a gorilla or the slitheriness of a snake? Or who doesn't pull back and glad that there's a really strong piece of perspex or glass when you see a deadly spider? God's made a wonderful world until you're 13. And when you get to 13, maybe 14, nothing makes you wonder, apart from why are my parents so square? Friends, all of us are afraid to wonder when we get to adults. All of us need to be re-enchanted. All of us need to put down our scoffing, put down our skepticism, and understand grace so that we can laugh at ourselves and be amazed at the wonder of the world in which we lived and amazed at the wonder of the God who made the world. I don't know what you think about Beauty and the Beast, the proper old version, not the new one. In Beauty and the Beast, there is an impossible situation. And then there's a heroine. There's a heroine who sacrifices herself. She loves the unlovely and she redeems the world. And it's a great story with a wonderful Disney soundtrack because it's enchanting. It's something in our hearts that we want. And that story, like so many other stories of screen and page and play as well, they all come from the greatest story ever told. They all come from the gospel story that provides the fuel, the enchantment, the themes for every story in the world. It's a story of wonder, but it's also a story of truth. I was listening to an interview with Frank Skinner, the comedian who's reconverted to Catholicism, and he says the problem with Christianity as I return to it is we've taken out all the enchanting factors and we need to bring them all back. Look at the structure of chapter 21. Over and over again we've seen through Genesis 11 to Genesis 21, God will do what he said, as he said it, when he said it. But then we get to Genesis 21 and there's an impossible situation. Abraham is 100 years old. They're worn out, they're barren. And then there's a heroine or a hero. And that's the son of promise. C.S. Lewis says in his famous article on hope, there are two types of people. There's the cynic. There's the cynic who laughs at the idea that there are powers out there, that there's more to the eye than we can see. That's the reason they've got no wonder. Then you have the fool. There's another person. If the first is a cynic, the second is a fool. The fool thinks, I can save myself. I can put my life right by myself. And as a result, the cynic and the fool have got no wonder. In the gospel, we're told that we are in an impossible situation, and yet God is all-powerful. The impossible situation is that our sin is a barrier between ourselves and our Maker, and yet there is a hero to the story, the son of promise. And the son of promise is not Isaac, but it's the one to whom Isaac points. Think about it. If this is an impossible birth, the birth of Isaac to aged parents, this birth is a triumph of God's grace through impossible situation. You've got a wife who's 90, a husband who's 100 years old. Just think about how the greater Isaac was born. He was born without an earthly father. Try that one on for size. The greater Isaac was born without a husband, without an earthly father. The angel came to his mum and said, nothing is too hard, better translation, nothing is too wonderful for God. This is the son of promise, and he came. He came 2,000 years ago. Now, how is it possible? Well, as I said, there are three types of laughter, and you need to go through the first two to get to the third. You need to get over your laughter of scoffing, your laughter of disbelief. You need to get over and see your laughter of idolatry, your heart's first love. It needs to change from whatever it is that you're trying to save yourself through, and it needs to transfer to the Lord and to his grace. God has made me laugh, says Sarah. He's brought me laughter. This power has come from on high. This power has come by faith in Jesus. You need to believe in the authenticity of God. You need to remember and enjoy his power. You need to remember and enjoy his truth and rejoice in it and rest in it. You have to take your heart off the Isaacs of your life, and you need to rest in the security that Jesus alone can bring. Now, how does that happen? Well, a lot of us in our past lives, in our younger years, have laughed at the claims of Christianity. But this theme of laughter is not just in Genesis 11 to 21. It's there throughout the Bible. Before the world was made, Proverbs 8 verse 30 says this: there was a divine dance of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I danced and rejoiced before God as we created the world together. The word there is Isaac. We laughed, we enjoyed each other, we sang over each other as we created the world, as we brought it into being. I danced before the Lord, I danced before God, I delighted in him as we created the world. Throughout all of history, the Godhead was laughing, enjoying, rejoicing. But on the cross, Jesus received a frown so that we might be able to laugh. The truth of the gospel in a sentence. He lost the smile of God so that we could have it. He felt the Father's frown so that we could enjoy his grace. Christians should be people that laugh at ourselves. We don't take ourselves seriously. We take the gospel very seriously. But look at Sarah, that's who we are. We are people who doubt God's promises. We're people that just recognize our many failures can be redeemed. Did you notice that the name is given to Isaac is laughter? She's not afraid of her failures. She laughed at the possibility that God would come through on her promise, Genesis 17:18, and yet that's the very name she gives to her son. The world says you need to gloss over, you need to erase, you need to cancel, you need to forget your greatest failures, and if you don't process them, you can never move on. Sarah's a lovely example of saying, you know what? I want to remember my failures because it's a testimony to God's grace. I'm going to call my son Isaac. I laughed at the Lord. He didn't strike me down, but I laughed at the Lord, and by his grace, my failures have been redeemed. That produces humility, compassion, wisdom, skill. That's how you face your past, with the laughter of God. Let's pray together.